and welcome back again. And we finish up our tour of the second company's guns with Thumper, our 3-inch howitzer. It is a Daniel King style howitzer with a 3-inch bore. The howitzers had a different nomenclature instead of the field guns. The field guns, as you recall, were measured by their weight of the throw of their shot. The howitzers were nomenclatured by the dimension of the bore. 3-inch, obviously, is a 3-inch projectile. Now these weapons were designed a little differently. You notice that the barrel's very much shorter than either of the other two that you saw earlier. This weapon's designed as an indirect fire weapon. It was designed to engage an enemy behind a palisade, inside of a fortification, perhaps inside of a trench system. And so because of that, it was designed to fire at a much higher angle. This gun can be fired anywhere from 0 to nearly 45 degrees, and that's why the deep carriage. This allows you to throw a projectile at a high angle and land inside of a walled fortification, inside of perhaps palisaded fort, or even an entrenchment system. It also did not fire solid shot. It fired something called shell. And a shell was just what it looks like. Think about an egg or an eggshell. It's thin, it's hollow inside. Well, a shell was hollow, and this one, as you can see, is hollow. This was hollowed on both ends, has a hole to meet legal requirements. And it had a fuse inserted and powder on the inside. This was inserted after the weapon was cleaned, cleared, a charge of powder went down, and then the projectile went in with the fuse on the outside. The idea being that when it was fired, the blast and the fire coming around the windage of the bore and the projectile would ignite the fuse. It would travel with the projectile until it was very close to, on top of, or actually inside of the fortification before it exploded. Now the good gunner had to be very careful about how long he cut his fuse. If you cut the fuse too close to the plug, it's going to go off and explode very much in front of your gun, taking out your gunners, which is not a good idea. If you make the fuse too long, it lands in the fortification and it rolls around a while. You give the enemy a chance to throw wet sand on it, clean it up, put it back in another one and send it back to you. Again, not a good idea. You had to cut these just right, and they were very, very proficient at knowing the length of their fuse and the rapidity of how long the fuse would last. Now, it also was important to know your distance because you had a certain amount of time in flight and you wanted to explode ideally either right over top of the target or immediately upon landing. So we'll put this aside. We've already gone over the loading procedures with the other weapons, and we have mentioned a piece that we have not shown. Now, again, you run the cartridge and the projectile down the bore, and the prick and prime order comes, and you're pricking it open. So it's opened up by breaking it open, cotton or linen powder cartridge, and then you are going to put a fuse that we call a quill into it, or you can use loose powder from cartridges or from a horn. Loose powder needs no explanation. It's just loose powder poured down inside there until it makes a mound on top, and you ignite it with your linstock. But a quill's a little different. A quill in the 18th century was made exactly from that, a goose quill. Now, goose quills are hollow. If you strip the barbs off, the part you think of as a feather, you end up with a hollow tube. They took that hollow tube, took string or yarn and ran it through beeswax and then through gunpowder, fed it through and knotted both ends, and you had a powder train that made an almost instantaneous connection from the top to the bottom, and it was fairly waterproof. You could dip one end in the beeswax and the other end in the beeswax, and you'd have something that was not going to get wet in your gunner's pouch when you're out and the weather's foul. So you put this inside here. Now today we make them, well, you could still make them with goose quill, but the geese that I know don't like their feathers being pulled out, and geese are pretty aggressive in the first place, so we opt for the paper straw method. Paper straw, some thin cellophane tape, running on some powder onto that, rubbing it down with your finger so it sticks, roll it up and put it into that, and maybe a couple of small match heads on the top for an igniting source. It makes it very quick. Once you touch that linstock to that and it actually bites, it flashes and it's immediate. It's not like a Bugs Bunny fuse. If you've watched Bugs Bunny and you saw him with Yosemite Sam and they lit the fuse and you see it go tss, and burn down real slowly and then go off, that would be very difficult to deal with on a battlefield. You never knew when your gun was going to go off or if it was going to go off. So a very quick fuse is what you need. And that's what the quill provided. So I hope these were interesting to you. And please check back with us, and we'll possibly have other videos later.